And that's what we did. We took 4 weeks here to just kind of revisit that vision, talk about what that slogan means, what it means to go deeper, to address our maturity issues and address our desire to be mature followers of Christ, actively changed followers of Christ. We looked at what it means to live intentionally, that knowing Jesus should create purpose and should create identity in our lives, that who we are is who we are as a result of meeting Jesus, knowing Jesus, and the work he's doing in our life. And that creates purpose, whether we're in school, whether we're at work, whether we're taking care of family, whatever our vocational calling is, it's defined and it's guided by who we are in Jesus. And so we talked about living intentionally. And now the last one this morning is basically the heartbeat of our church, because it's the heartbeat of God. And that is to reach further, to take all the great things God has done in our life and share them. Share them with the people we know, our family, our friends, our teachers, co-students, co-workers. Share them with people we're just now meeting in any number of circumstances where we meet somebody and we have the opportunity to share with them about who Jesus is and the impact Jesus has made on our lives. We have those opportunities and we take advantage of those opportunities and we enjoy it. And one of the things I want to do this morning is I want to go back to the very basics. One of the things I hear a lot as a pastor over time is, in a sense, sort of a fear of sharing our faith, a fear of just putting ourselves out there when it comes to who we are as Christians. And I want to take just a moment. I'll acknowledge, so that everybody knows, I acknowledge, particularly wherever you are in a spectrum from introvert to extrovert, it could be difficult and it could be a bit of a struggle, and you have to work through that. But what I want to do this morning is just help us look at the basics and understand that the decision to follow Jesus, that decision to connect with him, is very naturally followed by the assignment that he gives us to reach further, to touch into other people's lives with the hope that we have in Jesus, and then to accept that assignment as our trust, something that we are fully committed to and that we make a very intentional decision to be active in, to be a part of. It's actually relatively simple and it's relatively straightforward. And what we do to reach further is actually something that grows out of that relationship and out of the life change that happens as we meet Jesus and as we experience things with Jesus. So that strategically, that living intentionally becomes pretty much just in step. As we grow in our relationship, as we mature in our relationship, it just becomes more available and easier for us to talk to other people and to let them know, this is what Jesus has done for me. This is why I live this way. And this is the hope I want to share with you. So we're going back to a very basic moment in Matthew chapter 4. Throughout the Old Testament, the church is called, the church is challenged, the people of God are challenged, even in the Old Testament, to share the hope, share the light, share the truth about God. That got lost somewhere along the way, and Jesus arrives, and from the first moment he arrives, when the angels declare his presence, we see this paradigm shift where it is common and it is normal and it's a regular part of our life to be able to simply say to others, this is what Jesus has done for me. And this is how my life is different meeting Jesus. But in Matthew chapter 4, we have like the first official calling. These are the very first of his disciples. And what you're going to see in Matthew chapter 4 is you're going to see 4 individuals that have already met Jesus. They're already aware of Jesus. But that awareness is going to take on a new level of connection, and they're going to connect with Jesus. Let me read the passage to us real quickly in its entirety, and then kind of walk through what happens with these 4 individuals. In verse 18, so Matthew chapter 4, verse 18, as he was walking along the Sea of Galilee, he saw 2 brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, he'll be named that later, and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. Follow me, he told them, and I will make you fish for people. Immediately they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers. Let me get the right word there. He saw two other brothers, James the son of Zebedee and his brother John. They were in a boat with Zebedee, their father, preparing their nets, and he called them. Immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. First, you see the connection. Now, what we know historically and what we know from the Bible about these four men is they already were aware of Jesus, but they weren't really connected with him. All these men are faithful. All these men did all the things you're doing. They went to their version of church in the synagogue. They went to their version of Bible study, Sunday school, and learned. They knew scriptures. They had scriptures memorized. They knew who the Messiah was going to be, but they weren't connected in that way in a personal relationship like is possible after meeting Jesus. And so when they heard that things were happening and something was taking place, they began to be drawn into that. And so Andrew, Peter's brother, Simon's brother, Andrew hears of John the Baptist, understands what John the Baptist is saying, follows John the Baptist, and so when he's not fishing, he's spending time with John the Baptist, and he's hearing that the Messiah is arriving. And then when he hears that the Messiah is arriving, when John introduces Jesus to the crowd and says, "Here, behold, here's the Lamb of God. Here's the Savior of the world," and he's pointing to Jesus, Andrew immediately runs back and he finds his brother Simon and he tells his brother Simon, "Look, I need you to come. I want you to come. Here, I believe we have met the Christ. I believe we have met God's anointed. I believe we have met the Messiah." And Simon goes with Andrew and begins to listen to Jesus. So the scenario is not real difficult in terms of just trying to imagine that Jesus just walks up to their boat. He's never met them before. They don't know who he is. And he simply says, "Okay, this is what I want you to do. I want you to follow me. I want you to come with me, and I'm going to change your entire career path, and you're going to stop fishing for fish, and you're going to become fishers of people." They already knew who Jesus was. They had a basic concept of who Jesus was. And now they have the opportunity to connect, which we should really identify with that, because growing up in Western civilization, growing up in the United States, many of us had some concept, however frail that concept may have been, of who Jesus was. Some idea that there's something spiritual here, something religious here, something to do with God in that atmosphere. But we didn't connect until that moment happened when we trusted in him and said, "Yes, I believe in him." James and John are the same way. If you look at verses 18, you look at verses 21, Jesus goes from Peter and Andrew, goes a little bit further, sees these two brothers, the sons of Zebedee, who are actually fishing. Probably this is in the morning. The fact that they're preparing their boats and they're working on their nets means that they are probably morning after having fished most of the night, definitely the early morning hours. This is commercial fishing. They've been casting nets. They've got their haul, and they're basically making the arrangements as a result of that. And Jesus sees them, and they see Jesus. And again, we know from historical information that James and John were familiar with Jesus. They had been listening to John the Baptist again. There was, in a sense, a type of a relationship there, even if they didn't fully understand, that they could be totally and fully connected to Jesus. And so when we talk about reaching further, it begins with us being connected with Jesus. We're not asking anybody to share a philosophy. We're not asking anybody to share a structure of theology. We're not asking anybody to share something institutionally. We're actually, believe it or not, our priority is not even sharing the story of First Baptist Church. It is first and foremost that we are connected with Jesus, and from our personal experience, we have the opportunity to introduce somebody to Jesus. That's our opportunity. That's our chance. That's our moment when we meet Jesus ourselves. I had a conversation late Thursday afternoon with a young boy in our church who made that decision to trust in Jesus. And as I talked to him and his father, we had the opportunity to have that conversation openly, candidly. And the longer we talked, the more obvious it had become that in a very real sense, all he had heard for the first 7 years of his life, one night while in his room, made sense. And he asked Jesus to be a part of his life. He connected directly with Jesus. It was no longer a matter of what he had learned on Sunday. It's no longer a matter of what he had learned through the week from his parents, but it was a matter of what he personally experienced. And he was very defined in it. He understood, and he understood the relationship. And it's amazing to me that when we meet Jesus, and I've seen this over and over and over again, as well as experiencing it personally, the first tendency is to tell someone. And so he leaves his room and he goes to another part of the house and he finds his mother. And the first thing he wants to do is tell her, I met Jesus. I believe in Jesus. And because he's been in church his whole life, he wants to follow in the next first big step to share Jesus, and he wants to be baptized. And we're going to get to do that next Sunday in this service, actually. So it'll be something you get to witness firsthand. Because he told me, and this is so important because it is fearful, it is frightening, but he told me, watching the other kids get baptized last Sunday, and he's good friends with Olivia, Josh's daughter, and he specifically said, watching Olivia get baptized made me brave. And he's ready to be baptized. Why is this so important in a church context? Because when we all are doing this, that example and that interaction with one another enables us to be brave. Because it can be frightening. You are potentially getting threats from work. You're potentially getting threats at school. You're potentially being told in a wide variety of areas. One of the reasons it's so absolutely critical that we participate in this election is one of the issues on the table is freedom of speech, which means freedom to tell people about Jesus. And if they shut down our ability to tell people about Jesus, less people will know, less people's lives will be changed. So I understand it can actually be frightening, intimidating, and a little scary at first. But the great thing about living in context of community in church life is you get to hear about that little boy's testimony, and you get to be just like him. And you're able to sit there right now in this moment or be with us on live stream in this moment and think to yourself, you know what? If they can do it, I can do it. And there's mutual courage in being together and connecting with Jesus. These four guys are going to spend the rest of their life together following Jesus. In this specific case, Jesus gives them an assignment. The connection moves to assignment. In verse 19, he says to Simon and Andrew, follow me, and I will make you fish for people. To James and John, Matthew tells us that Jesus called them in verse 21. Follow me. He called them. And he changes our vocation. And the great part is Jesus clarifies it in this exact same book. If you go to the very end of Matthew, you go to the end of chapter 28, Jesus clarifies it. And he literally says, as you go, make disciples of all nations, teaching them, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So God may not call a full vocational change. You may not go from being commercial fishermen to being called and vocational evangelist, sharers of the life of Jesus, which is perfectly okay, because the reality is it's where we are as we go, as we're a part of these conversations, that our assignment takes place. So when I go to school, I look for and I embrace the opportunity to talk about Jesus. I follow Jesus and I become a fisher of people. I go to work and I have the opportunity whether it's with customers, whether it's coworkers, whoever I come into contact with, I have the opportunity to share with them that hope that is in Jesus. It's an assignment. It is a part of following him that we naturally begin to share about him. And it's as simple as introducing our friends. It's as simple as saying, hey, I want you to meet this guy. He changed my life. His name's Jesus. He happens to be God. And he loves you just as much as he loves me. And he wants to be a part of your life just as much as he wanted to be a part of my life. Most people, when they're connecting with Jesus, and we are following through on our assignment to talk to them about Jesus, most people aren't needing all the details and all the information we've accumulated after years of study and years of participation in church. They just want to know, is Jesus real, and will Jesus make a difference? And you have everything you need to answer those two questions. Because you already know that Jesus is real. You've already experienced him. And you already know that it makes a difference because you've already seen the difference he's made in your life. And it becomes natural and relatively easy even to overcome any tendency towards being introverted or shy to be able to say, this is my best friend. This is the only thing that ever changed my life, meeting Jesus. And it's our natural first instinct. Just like that young boy immediately went and told his mom, we immediately go. Many of you have already heard. Some of you are new enough. You haven't heard my full testimony. But I will tell you, after I met Jesus and after I realized, about 24 hours after I met Jesus, I realized, okay, this is really happening and this is really true and this is real. And I just met God and I've just committed my life to him. And I've got to figure that out. I don't know what that means. I didn't have the background that James and John and Peter and Andrew did. I didn't have the background that maybe many of you have. And so I needed to sort it out. But one of the very first things, as I began reading through my Bible, I was guided to read the Gospels first, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, read those quickly. In the process of doing that, without a way that I really can't even understand, God immediately convicted me. And I immediately knew I needed to tell my parents. Now, I wasn't in the same house. I was away, several hundred miles away, but I made the decision to go home that summer to spend those 3 months with one singular assignment, to tell my parents I had met Jesus, to reconcile our very broken relationship, and to hopefully help them understand who Jesus was and that they could meet Jesus as well. I had my sister as well. She was still at home at that time and had the opportunity to share with her. And you don't know the results because we're not responsible for the results. In many ways, I still don't know the results to my parents. But I know what happened to my sister because my dad called me pretty upset one night to tell me that my sister had gone to a concert with some of my Christian friends that I had met that summer. And at that concert, he didn't understand what happened, but all he knew is since she got home from the concert that night, she couldn't stop crying. And he was not happy, and he was not pleased. She's always been kind of the favored one, but that's okay. There's good reason for it. Let me just put it that way. So he puts her on the phone, and I'm asking her, Kathy, what's going on? What's happening? And Dad's upset. He said, you've been crying all night? You were at a concert? And she started crying again. She said, yeah, your friends took me to a concert down at the church, and I heard this group singing, and they talked about Jesus, and then the guy stood up and said, if you want to meet Jesus, come talk to us. And I went and talked to him, and I met Jesus tonight. She wasn't crying because she was distressed. She was crying because for the first time in her life, she felt really, really whole. And she's still doing it today. She's participating in her church. Her daughter and her husband are actively in church. Her grandchildren are actively involved. Hear the gospel, know the gospel. We receive an assignment, and it's a natural assignment. And most of us, I believe with all my heart, most of us who are connected with Jesus and who receive this assignment from Jesus, most of us want to tell somebody. It's just a matter of doing it. Which then creates what I'm calling a trust. That there is a trust for Jesus. He gives us the assignment, but we make the decision to take that assignment. And now it's entrusted to us, so it's a trust that we manage. It's like we have fiduciary responsibility for it. We have the opportunity to share that. In verse 20, you see Peter and Andrew. Immediately they left their nets and followed him. They made that decision. They weren't going to turn back. They were ready to do it. Look at verse 22. Immediately they, referring to James and John this time, left the boat and their father and followed him. That's the trust. You connect with Jesus, you receive the assignment, and then you take on the responsibility, the trust to do that. With every opportunity we get, any place we go. Obviously, I think God works through families, and sometimes that's the most difficult place to share, but sometimes it's the most critical place to share. But we have so many other relationships. God has interconnected us with our world so that we have the opportunity to talk about and to share Jesus any place we go. And so we move outside of our own limitations, outside of our own boundaries. I was visiting here a while back with one of our city officials, and he was telling me about the rapid growth. We've had tremendous rapid growth in the Tomball region. I mean, every week you can just drive around and you're not going to see dozens of new homes. You're not even going to see hundreds of new homes. You're going to see thousands of new homes. And most of that has happened in the last decade. But he talked about an interesting scenario because I was asking him, I said, I think it's great. I mean, I love it. There are so many more restaurants. And I love restaurants. We've quadrupled the number of donut stores in the last decade. And I love donut stores. To me, it's just great. But he said, but not everybody thinks it's great. And he described an attitude that I didn't realize happened in a municipality. But he said there is a perspective oftentimes in a fast-growing area where things are exciting and things are happening and you want to be a part of the vibe and you want to be a part of what's going on, that your perception is, this is awesome. I am so glad to be here. Now that I'm here, shut the door right behind me. Because the complexities of the growth, nobody really wants to experience or invest themselves in it. And so the attitude is, I am really glad I'm here, but I don't really want anybody else joining me. And, I kind of laughed and I said, I have never heard that about municipalities, but I can tell you as a pastor, I see that happen all the time in church life. We love the church as it is, where it is, in this moment. And all those new people, all those strange people, they're making it harder. They don't know where I sit, and they'll sit right there. They don't know what we do, and they get confused, and I have to explain to them. And it's required changes. In our case, our whole church is relocating to be able to adapt to those changes. Because in this generation, you need a state-of-the-art building. In this generation, we need to be accessible to the community. I already have requests. We already have requests to use the new building. The community is so excited about it. A consultant asked us one time in a focus group, he said, what's the one thing this community will miss if First Baptist Church disappears overnight? Unanimously, everybody agreed they'll miss our buildings because we host dozens and dozens of things. Well, that was true of these buildings, but it's already true of the new buildings. We already have requests to use the new facility next year because people are looking forward to it. But we don't just give out facilities for the sake of giving out facilities. We don't stretch ourselves and push ourselves because of that. We do so because we have a trust. Because we immediately left our nets and followed Jesus. Because we immediately left our boat, and in many cases, even some family, and followed Jesus. That's our trust, which means we take the action necessary to be able to reach further into the place God has planted us. When you look at Jesus and who he is and what he does for us, in one sense, this doesn't feel like a complicated decision. But in other ways, we recognize it is a major change in our lives. There's a story in the Old Testament that I think really just portrays that difficulty in making that decision, but yet the desire to want to accept the connection, to accept the assignment, and accept the trust. In 1 Kings chapter 19, in verse 19, we have a story of Elijah and Elisha. Elijah is the existing prophet. Elisha is to be the successor to Elijah. In verse 19 it says, Elijah left there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat, as he was plowing. 12 teams of oxen were in front of him, and he was with the 12th team. Elijah walked by him and threw his mantle over him, which is a symbol of authority. Elisha left the oxen, ran to follow Elijah, and said, "Please let me kiss my father and mother, and then I will follow you." Elijah's response, I interpret it as probably a little on the harsh side. It says, "Go on back, for what have I done to you?" Speaking of Elisha, the narrative tells us that he turned back from following him and took the team of oxen and slaughtered them. With the oxen's wooden yoke and plow, he cooked the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he left, followed Elijah, and served him. Elijah stops Elisha right in the middle of that moment. He symbolically puts his mantle on Elisha, which means his power, his authority is going to transfer to Elisha as the succeeding prophet. That'll be fulfilled in a moment later in their lives when Elijah is taken up into heaven supernaturally. Elijah is one of a few people in the Bible that did not actually die. Supernaturally taken up into heaven. That mantle drops to the ground. Elisha picks it up, walks to the creek, slaps it on the water parts, and Elisha crosses on dry ground, the new prophet for the next era. But it wasn't that easy that day when Elijah called him. He's like, I want to do this, but let me take care of this and this and this and this. And Elijah's response is like, what exactly do you think I've done to you? You don't need to take care of anything when God calls you. But Elisha does. He goes back, and in a strong symbolic act, he says goodbye to his family, to his neighbors. He takes his livelihood, everything that he had, he takes it and he slaughters those oxen, cuts them up, prepares them for dinner. He takes the implements of plowing, breaks them apart, piles them up, creates fire out of them, literally burning his livelihood up, cooks the meat, and in a true Texas fashion, hosts a barbecue for all of his friends. And as soon as the brisket's been served, Elisha probably said something, but the most important part of that whole phrase in that story, then he left, followed Elijah, and served him. Think about those words again in verse 20 of Matthew chapter 4. Immediately they, Peter and Andrew, left their nets and followed him. Verse 22, immediately they, James and John, left the boat and their father and followed him. What are we waiting for to meet Jesus? And what are we waiting for to share Jesus? There's really no reason to wait. Father,